Hey y'all, welcome back to Weird True Crime. I'm Gina and I am so happy to be back with you today. I've got a real weird case that I want to talk to you about, but first I kind of just want to check in, see how everybody's doing. How was your Labor Day weekend? Mine was good. My oldest son had his first sleepover this weekend and it went so well, but I am really old and go to bed early, and these kids stayed up until midnight and wanted to swim at nighttime. So we went out into the backyard and swam and got destroyed by mosquitoes. And I've been taking antihistamines for a couple days to just kind of like survive from all the mosquito bites. And I've been so loopy and out of it. So it's taken me a little longer to get my shit together this week because of that. So I hope everybody else had a little bit of fun over the long weekend. I actually changed my mind about what I wanted to cover for this case. The first case that I actually wanted to do originally just turned out to be too dark to talk about. Just kind of a highlight. Basically, I found this article or articles about this crush case a few years ago, and it was actually about these animal abuse videos where people were being paid to make animal abuse videos where they would abuse and eventually kill animals. And the details were just too gruesome and made me really sick to my stomach, and I couldn't talk about it. I didn't want to research it. I didn't want to find out more. I definitely didn't want to accidentally run across pictures or videos of what happened or what was in the videos. So yeah, I decided to skip it because for some reason, talking about murder of people is not as hard as talking about the abuse and murder of animals. Because yeah, I couldn't do it. And I think, I feel like that's true for a lot of podcasters I listen to. Anytime they talk about anything happening to an animal, they kind of have to take a minute and breathe or give a trigger warning so people can skip over those. And I felt like that whole topic was just a giant trigger warning. So I decided to skip over it. So yeah, we're going to talk about a woman named Nannie Doss today, or Nancy Doss. This is a case that I had heard about before, but it had been quite a while, so I had forgotten a lot of the details. And it's definitely weird true crime, so I'm excited to get into this one with y'all. Before I get into it, I did want to tell you a funny little story of something that happened last week. So I was taking the kids to school in the morning, and my husband decided to jump in the car and go with us. And every morning there's a big group of kids and their parents at the school bus stop, like right down the street, but I drive my kids because they're spoiled. So my husband made the comment about how he thought it was weird that there were so many parents sitting there waiting with their kids at the school bus stop. And my immediate reaction was, you obviously don't listen to or watch enough true crime, because I don't think that's weird at all. And I would 100% be standing there at the bus stop with my kids if they rode the bus. But I figured all of you true crime junkies would get a little bit of a kick out of that, because I thought that was a really funny comment coming from him. I think he was a bus rider. I never rode the bus, so I'm sure he was used to like going to the bus stop by himself as a kid. But these days, yeah, that's just not really something you do unless your kid is maybe a little older or has like a phone or some other way to communicate with you. But anyway, I thought that was kind of just a funny little antidote I wanted to share with y'all. I also hope that maybe I sound a little clearer. I've been doing some work in my little podcasting corner. I've got some of those cool hexagon foam things up on the wall, and I got a new microphone with a cover and like one of those shock cages and all sorts of stuff. So we're getting real fancy over here in this corner, which is really exciting and makes me want to work on this here little podcast even more. So hopefully it sounds a little better. I promise we will just continue to improve as we go along. But with that said, I guess it's kind of time to dig into old Nannie Doss here. I found this whole case really, really interesting and entertaining, and I think y'all will too. So let's get into Nannie Doss's childhood, shall we? She was born Nancy Hazel in November of 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama. It's now known as Anniston, Alabama, actually. She was one of 5 children and had 1 brother and 3 sisters. She actually hated her father. I think that was probably a pretty common thought between her and her siblings and her mother. From what I read, it sounds like he was really controlling and unfortunately abusive, and he wouldn't let her go to school because he wanted her to work on the farm. So of course this resulted in her not being very well educated. And she actually eventually dropped out of school during or after her 6th grade year so she could focus on the farm. And I'm sure that wasn't her choice, but her father's. Also, at the age of 7, I read that she apparently had an accident on a train where she hit her head on the metal bar on the seat in front of her when the train stopped really abruptly. And the story goes that because of this head trauma that she endured, she suffered from depression, headaches, and blackouts during her lifetime. And she blamed this incident in her childhood for a lot of that, as well as her actions that she went on to take later in life. Now, I know that a lot of studies and information is out now about the impact of brain injuries on you, especially as a child and even later in life, like in the case of football players and things like that. So there could be some truth to this. I couldn't find any more details about the trauma or how severe the trauma was. So I really can't say one way or the other if this did have anything to do with what she went on to do later in life. But I do think she had a hard childhood and really dealt with some things, and that probably played into a lot of what she did later. But in her early teens, she also became interested in her mother's romance magazines. These romance magazines, I looked into them a little bit, and that's what they are. There was one called Romance. There was another one called Love Story. These writings, I didn't read a ton of them. I skimmed over a couple of the stories. Honestly, they were really racist and misogynistic. And I mean, that's not surprising given the time. This was, the 1920s, and these were popular between 1920 and the end of 1940. So the writing isn't really that surprising, but it's still hard to read, These stories made her dream of her own romantic future. I'm sure a lot of that was just a form of escapism for her to get out of and away from her day-to-day life. I feel like there's a big comparison between these romance stories talking about these men sweeping these women off their feet and giving them these fairy tale lives, and the more modern day Disney movies and princess stories, where these princesses find their prince and they live happily ever after and nothing bad ever happens, right? And studies have been done, and we now know the kind of impact that those stories and movies and fairy tales have on young girls who look at this and see this as the way romantic relationships are supposed to be. So they grow up with certain expectations and ideas of what a romantic love should look like, when in reality, that's not what romantic love looks like at all. And so for a young girl who was already not very bright, not well educated, dealing with emotional and physical abuse at home, she's reading these stories and it's creating this sort of fantastical ideal of what life could or should be. And so I think that really paves the way for a lot of what happens as she gets older and into her adulthood, unfortunately. And that's the danger of these kind of stories, right? Because if we allow our impressionable children to read this kind of fiction without explaining to them that that's exactly what it is, it's fiction, I think we're setting them up for a lot of failure and letdown later in life. And I hate to be so negative about it, but I think that's true. And we need to be realistic and set them up for real expectations of what it means to have a partner and be in a relationship with someone. But these desires for a romantic partner were obviously fueled by the abuse she dealt with at home, and her father didn't allow her or her sisters to wear dresses or makeup, and they couldn't attend dances or other social events. And apparently he did this out of fear of them drawing the attention of men, and he didn't want them to be molested. To me, honestly, it sounds like he abused them, so maybe he just didn't want to run the risk of them having another man in their lives, or he didn't want competition with other men, or it was just a way to control them to an extreme level, unfortunately, which is really gross as a father figure. But I think that was just kind of one more level of emotional and mental abuse that she dealt with as a child that really paved who she is as an adult. She did start working at the linen thread company at the age of 16, where she met Charlie Braggs. It sounds like he was also young. I didn't see what his actual age was, but he still lived at home with his single mother. And she and Charlie got married in 1921 after only dating for 4 or 5 months, and she was still 16 when they got married. Her father did approve of the marriage, which is really interesting to me, considering that he was so controlling over their lives, or not wanting them to meet other men, but yet he approved of her getting married so young. It could have been financially driven, one less mouth to feed or take care of. So he was like, yeah, sure, get married so you can get out of my house and I don't have to pay for you anymore. That could be part of it. But I just thought that was interesting because he was so controlling, but he was fine with her getting married so quickly at such a young age. And I'm sure that part of the reason that she decided to get married so quickly was because she wanted to get away from her father, right? So that probably had a lot to do with it. She did end up moving into the home with Charlie and his mother. And it's said that his mother's personality was pretty similar to Nannie's father's. So she didn't really get away from that control or abuse. She was just getting it from someone else now. And she and Charlie had a lot of kids really quickly. They had 4 daughters between the years of 1923 and 1927. That means she was basically pregnant nonstop from the ages of 18 to 22. And after this point, or during this time, she started drinking heavily and smoking a lot. And honestly, it's no surprise to me that she would start drinking heavily. I'm sure she was under so much stress with having so many kids consecutively to take care of and living under the roof of another controlling person. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people would turn to alcohol or other things to kind of help alleviate that pressure that you're feeling. Charlie's mother, like I said, was a single mother, and she was super involved in their lives. She took up a lot of his attention and was very, very controlling. And Nannie even said at one point that Charlie's mother wouldn't let her own mother. So she wouldn't let Nanny's mother come stay the night with them. She was that controlling that Nanny's mother, the grandmother of her children, could not come stay with them or spend decent amount of time with her daughter or her grandkids. Like I said, all of this stress led her to start drinking and smoking pretty heavily. Both Charlie and Nannie were adulterous and having affairs pretty frequently. Charlie would leave for days at a time. My question is, when did Nannie have time to go out and have these affairs? I mean, with 4 kids, it's amazing she really found time to do anything. She probably left the kids with her mother-in-law while Charlie was gone for days at a time. I couldn't really find any detail on that part of their marriage other than it wasn't good. And I think a lot of that has to do with how young they were, for starters, and how quickly they had all of these children. And that's not good for anyone at that age. You're still discovering yourself and figuring out who you are and who you want to be as a person. And you're already so tied down. I'm not surprised that it ended up the way that it did. Tragedy struck when their middle children, Zelma and Gertrude, died within a month of each other in 1927 from supposed food poisoning. Zelma died on August 30th and Gertrude died on September 25th. We now know that it's probably likely that Nannie killed them by poisoning their breakfast. I don't know why she would kill her own children, other than maybe it was just lack of money and resource to take care of them, and she killed them to lessen the load. That sounds so morbid, but I really could not find any information on why she might have killed her children. And given the time and how much they probably struggled, that's really the only logical, not that killing your child is ever logical, okay, but that's the only reason I could think of for why she might have done that, other than just pure insanity, which she obviously was. But I think that's where her murderous streak started, was in 1927 with the deaths of 2 of her own children. It wasn't long after this that Charlie, her husband, actually fled with their oldest daughter, Melvina, because he was anonymously warned not to eat anything she cooked. So he ran away with their oldest daughter and left Nannie alone with their newborn, Florine. I don't really know why he would leave a newborn baby with her if he had been warned not to eat the food she cooked. I could not find any information on that, but that's a little questionable. Maybe a newborn is so much work. Maybe the newborn was breastfed, and Charlie just didn't know how to care for an infant, and so he felt like his best option was just to take the oldest daughter and run. I really couldn't find anything, but that's questionable to me. Because Nannie was now a single mother, she went and got a job in a cotton mill to support her and her youngest daughter. And Charlie's mother actually died soon after he left with their oldest daughter, which of course, my immediate thought is Nannie killed her, and she probably did, but I don't see any proof that that was ever actually looked into or anything. Nothing was ever brought against her in the death of his mother, so I don't know. But my assumption is that she probably killed her. Charlie actually came back with Melvina in the summer of 1928 and brought a divorcee and her child with him. I guess that's one way to get out of marriage. You show up saying, hey, like, this is my new woman, my new family, and I'm ready to be done with you. So they divorced soon after that, and Charlie actually left Melvina with Nannie and left to be with his new partner and her child. So knowing that Nannie was probably a threat, and even claiming that he left her because he was scared of her, but he left his children with her. which is really sad to me if that's true. If you really are concerned about your safety and you've seen 2 of your children die in the hands of this woman, wouldn't you take your 2 surviving children with you? Or maybe he just didn't want to be tied to her in any way at all and decided to leave everything behind and start over. I can't say that I blame him for leaving, but it's pretty gross that he wouldn't take his children with him if he felt like he was in danger. Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty shitty, and I don't know whether or not he stayed in touch with them very much at all once he was out of the picture. But after the divorce, Nannie and her kids moved back in with her parents, and she got a job at a cotton mill. She met her second husband, Frank Harrelson, in the Lonely Hearts columns in the newspaper. So the Lonely Hearts ads, they were these ads, like personal ads, where men or women could write in the paper, asking for correspondence for people looking for a partner or marriage. So it was a lot like today's Tinder, Hinge, Match back in my day. Things like that. So one of the funny things I saw was that one of the examples I saw said for the women to reply with their height and weight first. So some things never change, right? It's funny how the idea of finding a relationship in this manner has been around for so long and become what it is. There are also quite a few instances of fraud where women would answer men's advertisements and then steal from them, and even cases of murder, which still happens. Funnily enough, I think that there was even several articles written and published in the papers about the shadiness of these Lonely Hearts ads and the fraudulent and murderous schemes that were happening because of these ads. And I did find a funny column that was published in December of 1884 in the Chicago Tribune, where a journalist put an ad in the paper as a farmer looking for a wife. And then he critiqued 36 of the responses he received, which is honestly super deceptive. And I don't think you could get away with something like that today, because he published all 36 of these responses in the paper. He did take out the women's identities or anything that would show where they lived or other factors. But I'm pretty sure that you couldn't get away with something like that today without letting the other person know that their private letters were going to be published in the paper. The journalist split up the type of women that replied to the ads into 3 groups. 50% are regulars who just reply to personal ads for fun with no real desire to meet or pursue anything. 25% are women who are actually looking for a partner and have probably been raised to believe that their whole purpose is to marry and have kids. These are his words. And the other 25% are, quote unquote, female vultures of whom nothing need be said. What the fuck does that mean? Are these the ones that are fraudulent? Are these like the quote unquote gold diggers? The funny part is that Nannie was definitely a vulture. So she may say she was looking for love, but let's be honest, she's a vulture. She's out to meet a man and take them for whatever they're worth. Anyway, I just thought it was funny. Nothing needs to be said about these vultures. They are who they are, and you know what that means. It was a very telling article of the time, just sitting there critiquing all of these poor women that are just looking for companionship of some sort, and their letters end up in the newspaper for all to see. But anyway, Frank and Nannie made out really well through these lonely heart ads, and he wooed her with poetry, and she replied back with saucy letters and pictures. And I'm sure she got a lot of inspiration from all of those romance magazines she read. So I'm sure that was good fodder for her to put into those responses that she sent to Frank. So she moved from Alabama to Jacksonville, Florida with her 2 surviving daughters to live with Frank. And a few months into the marriage, she actually found out he had a criminal record for assault. He was also an alcoholic and violent, which makes me wonder if she agreed to marry him before she had even met him or really gotten to know this man. And from future husbands, it seems like that's the case. It's just, oh, okay, you want to get married? Cool, let's get married. And so she marries these men kind of sight unseen and then finds out who they really are. Given how independent and no nonsense she seems, I'm really surprised that she stayed in the marriage after learning this about him. And they were actually married for 16 years. And during her marriage to Frank, her oldest daughter, Melvina, had her first child, Robert Lee Haynes, in 1943. And then she went on to have a daughter in 1945, but she unfortunately died soon after birth. And I couldn't find a specific timeline or whether it was the same day or the following day. But the story goes that while Malvina was recovering from labor and groggy from being on ether, which used to be inhaled to be used as an anesthetic, she saw Nannie stick a hat pin into the baby's head. When she asked her husband and sister for clarification about what had happened to the child, they said that Nannie told them the baby was dead and saw her holding a hat pin at the time. But doctors, of course, didn't see anything happen and couldn't verify the cause of death. There were old newspaper articles that I found that said that there were reports that the family saw her doing something or holding a hat pin at the hospital. But I'm curious to know if this were true, that no one told any sort of authority figure about their concerns. Like, it sounds like someone in the family saw something. So why was a police officer or a doctor or someone at the hospital not informed of this? Or maybe they were, but whoever examined the child couldn't find any proof. But I feel like if she had, this isn't a nice way to put this, but if she had stabbed this baby in the head with a hat pin, wouldn't there be some sort of wound or proof that this happened? I just don't understand how nothing came of this. That's the story that's told, and I believe it, that she killed her newborn granddaughter. No one knows why. Obviously, there was no monetary motivation or anything like that when it comes to it. She was just crazy, not a good person. And not long after the death of her infant, Melvina went to visit her father, Charlie. So it sounds like they did have some sort of contact. But she chose to leave her 2-year-old son, Robert, in Nannie's care. And I wasn't there. I only know what I would do as a mother in that circumstance. But, you know, it's a different time, and I don't know where Melvina was as far as like her headspace goes, but I don't understand why she would go visit her father without taking her son with her, especially if she suspected that Nannie did something to her newborn child. Why would she leave the son in her care? I also don't know why she wouldn't want to take her son to meet his grandfather, but for whatever reason, she decided to leave the son with Nannie. And while Melvina was gone, Robert, 2 years old, died of asphyxia. And a few months later, Nannie collected a $500 life insurance policy that she had taken out on him. So when did she take out this life insurance policy? And Melvina didn't have to give approval? Was this something that she did after Melvina left to go out of town? Was this something that she did without Melvina knowing? And then, once Nannie knew this policy was in place and she had a moment, she killed this boy for $500. I didn't do the research to find out what the steps were to take out a life insurance policy on someone in the 40s. But it seems like it was much easier to do then than it is now. I have so many questions. I don't understand when Nannie would have taken out the policy, how she could have taken out this policy without Melvina's signature or approval, or how a grandmother could even take out a policy on a child when there's a parent involved. I'm very confused. But obviously this was financially motivated because she did take out a policy and get money for the death of little baby 2-year-old Robert, which is just heartbreaking. Of course, Frank and Nannie's marriage was on the rocks. He was an alcoholic and abusive, after all. And in mid-September of 1945, Frank came home drunk after partying with some friends and forced Nannie to have sex with them, or basically raped her. And understandably mad about being assaulted, Nannie decided to put rat poison in his jars of corn whiskey, and he died the same day or soon after on September 16th of 1945. It was assumed that he died of food poisoning or some other ailment. I think it's really interesting that she has all of these people around her dying of food poisoning. And if she was really that bad of a cook that everybody was dying of food poisoning, why were people still eating her food? Why do they all just keep assuming it was food poisoning? I also found a mention in a newspaper article in November of 1954 that Frank Harrelson had a 2.5-year-old grandson that died 2 months before Frank did, but Nannie was never connected to that death. I don't want to assume that she was involved in that death, but considering that she's involved in so many of the other deaths around her, I feel like it's safe to assume that she probably had something to do with Frank's grandson's death as well as her own. After Frank's death, she was up to her old antics pretty quickly and met back up with a man named Arlie Lanning, who was a childhood friend of hers from Anniston, Alabama. Other articles that I found said that they met through the Lonely Hearts columns, but it was actually a newspaper article from November 27th of 1954 that stated they were childhood friends. So that's what we're going with, because I'm going to trust a newspaper article written at the time over other articles that have been written in more recent years. So she was traveling through Lexington, North Carolina at the time, where he was living. And so they met back up and they got married 3 days later after meeting back up and not knowing each other since they were children. So she's not wasting any time. She's moving fast, and they were married for a couple years. Arlie was also an alcoholic and a womanizer, which is something that Nannie may have figured out if she had taken the time to get to know the man before marrying him. Once again, she's marrying these men hoping for this fantasy love, but she's not getting to know them first or spending any time trying to understand who they really are before marrying them. And then finding out after she's bound to them that they're alcoholics or womanizers or abusers. She would leave him for months at a time during their relationship to go have other relationships. And when she was home, she would play the role of this doting housewife. And things changed in 1950 when Arlie died of what was listed as heart failure due to heavy drinking and a flu virus that was going around at the time. There was no autopsy done because of this flu virus and the fact that he was an alcoholic, so they figured it was just natural consequences of his poor health. He was buried and she was treated as this poor grieving widow. And soon after the funeral, the house that she and Arlie lived in actually burned down. And the house belonged to his sister. So that really sucks for his sister. But what I don't understand is the insurance money for the house went to Nannie. I don't understand how she keeps racking up all this money and getting people to put insurance policies in her name. So if the house belonged to his sister, how does she end up with the money from the home? It seems like that money would have gone to his sister, but I guess she must have convinced them to put her on the insurance somehow. So yeah, husband dies, house burns down. She inherits some money because of that. So she decided to stay in Lexington until Arlie's mother passed away in her sleep. That is what's reported. But once again, with how many people have died around her, I wouldn't put it past Nannie to have killed her too. I didn't see anything about insurance money being collected after his mother's death, but it could just be, this woman is around, she's a nuisance, she needs her out of the picture so she can go on and marry the next man. So that's what I'm thinking. She probably poisoned her. The woman died in her sleep. Boom, now I can move on and meet my next husband. So after Arlie's mother's death, Nannie moved in to live with her sister, Dovey, who is actually sick and bedridden at the time. And surprise, surprise, Dovey was dead within 3 months of Nannie moving into the house. After this, Nannie was back to the personal ads and met a man named Richard L. Morton through the Diamond Circle Club. And Morton lived in Jamestown, North Carolina. These two didn't move as quickly, but they did get married in 1952 in Emporia, Kansas. And it was around this time that Nannie's mother, Louisa, came to live with them after the death of Nannie's father. So Louisa came to move in with them in January of 1923. Richard was taking off for days at a time to be with other women in town, and Louisa had only been living in the home for a few days when she started complaining of severe stomach pains and died soon after. Are we even surprised at this point? What number is that? I don't know. I'll count it up at the end. But surprise, surprise, when Richard became ill soon after Louisa's death in May of 1953 and died. It turns out that Nannie had spiked his coffee with arsenic because she was jealous and tired of him going out and being with other women. After those deaths in her pocket, tucked down deep in her pocket, she wasted no time at all in boarding a bus to go meet Samuel Doss in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Doss had been a Nazarene minister in Arkansas when he tragically lost his wife and children in a tornado. The two, Nannie and Sam, got married in June of 1953, which was barely a month after the death of her fourth husband, Richard. So Sam wasn't a bad guy, but he was really straight-laced for Nannie. He didn't like her romance magazines, and he didn't want her to watch TV because it wasn't enlightening or educational. And, Nannie wasn't going to put up with this shit, right? It's like she's an independent woman who isn't going to sit around and let a man tell her what she can and can't do. So she left him for a little while and refused to come back until Sam agreed to put her name on his bank account and took out 2 life insurance policies that named her as the beneficiary. Where were his red flags? I understand being lonely and wanting a relationship with someone, but did he have no second thoughts, no concern around the idea of taking out 2 life insurance policies that would go to her in the case of his death just to get her to move back into the home? Doesn't that send any weird signals at all? I don't want to judge. I don't want to sit here and say he was simple or not so smart, or I don't know. I understand it was a different time, but if someone is sitting there telling you that the only way that they are going to come back and be with you is if you give them access to all of your money and take out life insurance policies for them to get if you die, I would be running as quickly as possible in the other direction. That's all I'm saying. So, of course, once Nannie was back in the home with her hands on his money and insurance policies, Sam fell ill, and she took him to the hospital. It took him over a month to recover from his illness until he was well enough to return home. The same day he returned home, he died. Nannie later admitted to putting arsenic on his bowl of prunes, which is what caused him to be ill and spend all that time in the hospital. And when this didn't work, she decided to use her tried and true method of arsenic in the coffee to kill him when he was back home. So Sam died on October 6th of 1954. Unfortunately for Nannie, this determination to put Sam in an early grave to get his money is what ended up being her undoing. So the doctor who treated Sam in the hospital for the month that he was there, he thought this was really suspicious, that Sam had gotten so much better, was well enough to go home, and then he dies the same day he gets home. So he convinced Nannie to let them perform an autopsy by telling her that determining the cause of death would help them save others, because it seems like Sam had some rare sickness or something that they needed to better understand to help them with patients in the future. So I don't know if she felt pressure to agree to it, because if she said no, maybe she felt like that would make her look guilty, or maybe it was her lack of education or understanding that impeded her ability to realize that an autopsy would reveal the truth about his cause of death. But unfortunately for Nannie, the autopsy revealed that Sam Doss had enough arsenic in his system to kill a horse. So once this was discovered, the doctor alerted police to what he found, and Nannie was arrested. Of course, she wasn't forthcoming at first. Detective Harry Steege, who questioned her, said that she talks a lot, but not about the case, and that she was really happy and talkative during the investigation, and she smiled and laughed a lot with the investigators. And this is how she got the nickname Giggling Granny. I thought it was funny. She has quite a few nicknames, but Giggling Granny is the one that really stood out to me. She told them about her marriage history and the deaths of her husbands. It does seem like she left out her marriage to Frank Harrelson, her second husband, initially, because there was no mention of him in the article. And the article that I saw actually lists Arlie Lanning as her second husband instead of her third, and there's no mention of Frank. And even though Lanning's death was presumed to be from natural causes, investigators decided to exhume his body and test it for poisoning because they just felt off about it. And she actually said that she didn't even know her fourth husband, Richard Morton, but she got caught in her lie because detectives showed her 5 insurance policies totaling $1,500 that named her as the beneficiary. And her response to this was, "Well, you got me trapped. I guess I did know him." I love how matter-of-fact she was about it. Like, oops, you caught me. Like, what else are you going to do? But I think it's funny that she denied knowing him in the first place when they have her name on his insurance policies. But after a couple days of questioning, Nannie signed a confession stating that she poisoned her fourth and fifth husbands, Morton and Doss. She then admitted to the marriage, or I guess talked about the marriage to Frank Harrelson. I did notice something weird, that the paper names him as Ernest, but every other article or information I found about the case names him as Robert Franklin Harrelson. So we're just going to keep calling him Frank. She told investigators that she killed him by putting rat poison in his corn whiskey. She also admitted to using poison to kill Arlie Lanning, her third husband. She also confessed to killing her mother, her 2.5-year-old grandson, Robert, and her mother-in-law. This may have been true, but so many people close to her died that we know the number is higher than that. So it's safe to say that she killed 4 husbands, 2 of her children, a newborn granddaughter, then her 2.5-year-old grandson, her mother-in-law, her sister Debbie, her own mother, and potentially Frank Harrelson's 2.5-year-old grandson. So that's 12 people total. Honestly, the number could be higher, but we just don't know. The state of Oklahoma based its case against Nannie Doss on the murder of Sam Doss only, because that was the only one that they could really prove. She pleaded guilty in May of 1955 and was sentenced to life in prison. The death penalty was not an option for women at the time, so it was life in prison. She was never charged with any of the other deaths. She spent 10 years in prison in Oklahoma until she died from leukemia in 1965. She apparently stated that she was motivated by love and not money, which could be true. I mean, all of those romance magazines as a young girl gave her, like I said, this false sense of what romantic love looks like. She rushed into all of these relationships with men she didn't know. And once she realized that it didn't look like the story she read and that these men were not good men or good men for her, she figured she would just kill them and take their money when possible and then move on to the next one. That doesn't explain why she killed innocent children or some of her other relatives. It obviously was about money when it came to those situations where she could collect life insurance or money, like in the case of our Lee Lanning sister's house burning down. So where she stood to gain something in the case of their death, she was going to do it. But it doesn't explain to me why she would kill her newborn granddaughter or some of the other people she killed where there wasn't really anything in it for her other than maybe just the satisfaction of doing it. And I also don't really see how hitting her head as a child could explain for all of the murders that she committed. It seems like that she had a lot of trust issues because of what she dealt with as a child, and that led to her having a hard time in romantic or familiar relationships. And also maybe she was just fucking crazy, which I think's the case. I think she was just crazy. And she tried to blame it on this, that, and the other. And in the end, it was she didn't like the relationships with these people. These people were not giving her what she wanted. So she killed them. And she got something out of it when she could. So that's the case of Nannie Doss. The level of audacity she had to kill everyone that she killed, including her close family members and grandchildren and children, is just insane to me. And I think that there were so many different times where she could have been stopped or caught. And I don't know if it was fear from other family members, maybe not wanting to say something because they were afraid if nothing came of it, she would turn around and kill them, or what. But I feel like there were plenty of opportunities to put this woman behind bars before she killed as many people as she did. And I'm not really sure what happened there. I will list all of the resources for the episode in the show notes. Make sure that you go follow me on social media at weirdtruecrime, and I'll post some pictures of Nannie Doss. There's not really a lot of pictures of her relatives or husbands, but I'll post what I have. She looks pretty happy in all of her pictures, which is pretty funny considering she's being questioned for the murder of multiple people, but I think that just goes to show who she is. So yeah, go follow me on Instagram at weirdtruecrime. You can also email me at weirdtruecrime@gmail.com. Email me and say hi. I want to talk to you. Okay? Email me and say hi. Send me your stories. They can be spooky. They can be a run-in with a creepy person. They can be anything. Just email me and say hi. I want to talk to you. And if you're enjoying the show so far, please go subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave me a review. It would mean so much to me to see your reviews. I've been putting a lot of myself into this and really putting myself out there. And if you like it and want to make me smile, go leave me a review. It would mean so much, and it would help to get my little show out there. I appreciate you sticking with me this far, and stay tuned for another episode of Weird Headlines next time, because I've got some really, really cool ones I want to share with you. And until then, stay safe. Bye.